Welcome everyone to our session. How might we scientists harmonize reason with sensibility? This session is with the focus area group, Harmonizing Reason with Sensibility. I'm Yoko Shimpuku. I'm a professor in global health nursing in Hiroshima University, and I have been executive committee of Global Young Academy since 2018 until this year. And today I'm moderating this session. And I would like to say that in the beginning that I have 2.5 months old girl with me. So if emergency happens, please bear with me. Okay, that's that. So if you are not familiar with this topic, you may wonder what this topic means. So let me start with explaining the issue we want to approach. The issue. In today's society, scientists are expected to play many diverse roles in science, technology, and research, including social implementation of research, policy, advocacy, and outreach to society. The spread of COVID-19 in 2020 also revealed the limitations of science's prediction of the future for rapidly spreading new infectious diseases and the challenges of communicating scientific findings widely to the public and encouraging behavioral change. Reviewing the relationship between science or scientists and society and creating a comprehensive and sustainable society through new ways of connecting the two has become an even more urgent issue. So we created the focus area group at the last year's AGM and call it Harmonizing Reason with Sensibility. We observed that the current pandemic issue reads to scientists, stakeholders, and citizens rethink the value of science. Science does not need to be a cordially rational, impersonal, and utilitarian force. Connecting science to emotional intelligence, common sense, and cultural sensibilities will forge new bonds with society and restore trust. So this topic is related to the conference topic as well. This year, Trust in Science. We have been discussing last few days. Then considering scientists and society, we started with discussing who a scientist is. We say natural philosopher. We say also someone who wants to contribute to the society, human beings, truth-seeking, ethical, critical thinking, and such. And there are a variety of answers. And we realize that we are not revealing a humanistic side of ourselves enough to the society. And what do we mean by sensibility? We are not trying to define sensibility, but we are trying to be inclusive, meaning emotional intelligence, common sense, and cultural sensibility. And you may also think of similar kind of means. And we think the sensibility decides which way to go, and reason decides how far we can travel. So science needs to have both, but we wonder, do we? And how do scientists develop both sides of ability and thinking? And this is an illustration of love, what is shared among scientists and non-scientists, as well as what is unshared, meaning specific to scientists. How might we share something visible with non-scientists? How might we reveal invisible side of us? We have discussed a lot more on this topic over the last year. I tried to summarize the discussion among our group members as this slide. Harmonizing reason with sensibility have mainly three aspects. for science, for scientists, and for citizens. So for science, we need to consider to reform or update generation of knowledge through integration of scientific and local knowledge. For scientists, we want to develop wider views of sciences, especially in social aspects, communicate more of human side of sciences. For citizens, we want better, more effective participation of citizens into scientific process. And in the end, what is the pathway to become a true scientist to enable an inclusive and sustainable future? I came to think that Global Young Academy is the place you can meet young scientists who have harmonized minds because we have selection process of not only scientific excellence, but also service to the society. For example, through our science leadership program and activities, including science advice and science and art, we can develop both sides of ourselves, like reason and sensibility. Today, we'd like to share what we have been discussing and want to involve you in this topic of discussion. And in the breakout rooms, we would like to collect interesting questions to ask on this topic from you so that we can make a survey to collect more information in the near future. Please don't worry, from now we have members and alumni give short speech so that you may get more sense on what we want to achieve here. And in the breakout rooms, group members act as moderators. You will be located in a small group. In a group, please assign a scriber. Anyone can write on your idea in the Google documents too. And in the discussion, please start with introduction of yourself, share your background, and discuss what questions you'd like to ask. For example, what is so appealing about science? What is rewarding about insight or progress? Maybe it is so natural for us that science is of course appealing and insight and progress are rewarding, but why is that? Please start to think and listen to short speech. So the first speaker is Jan Christoph Hellinger. Please introduce yourself and start speech. I'll close my PowerPoint.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Good to see you and good to see some of the names. I don't see the faces too. So welcome everybody from my side. My name is Jan Heilinger. I'm a GYA alumnus and a moral and political philosopher by training and working right now at RWTH Aachen University in Germany. When I was invited to say a few words about harmonizing reason with sensibility, I was happy to follow. And I think this Tokyo AGM theme really actually established a nice connection to the question also of trust in science, which we have been discussing these days. And me personally, I might, as probably we all do, suffer from a déformation professionnelle, but I see in both topics a joint element that interests me a lot also in my own research, and I will explain that. As I said, I'm a moral and political philosopher, and I'm working on questions of responsibility, in particular in questions on responsibility for justice, or even more precisely on the question who has what kind of responsibility to address certain current injustices. And examples for the injustices I'm interested in range widely from socioeconomic inequalities as they exist within nations, but also, of course, globally. Visible, for example, in unequal access to different kinds of goods, particularly important these days, access to vaccines, but also to novel technologies, medical achievements, opportunities for education, and so on. And another example I'm interested in, which is in structural injustice, which also raises questions of responsibility, is of course climate change, one of the most urgent challenges of our time, where we urgently have to respond and to react to. In all of these contexts, most share an intuitive feeling like someone should be doing something about that, right? So there needs to be some action to address these problems. And this intuition often is a consequence of initially maybe rather diffuse perception of injustice, of a feeling of maybe indignation, even outrage if we see that insufficient action is taken. So I think this trigger, or this diffuse initial feeling, is often a result of a certain sensibility, of a reaction, of a gut reaction we have towards certain states of affairs in the world. Now, applying reason to these topics or to this field would then consist of seeking a clearer or as clear as possible an analysis of the respective injustices and the responsibility relations that surround it. And this, in my view, is a particularly important form of already combining and maybe potentially harmonizing reason on the one hand with sensibility on the other. I could now, of course, go into many details of regarding the topics basically I mentioned and say much more than time allows, but I only want to make two brief remarks. First, this combination of sensibility and reason, or in other words, of the perception of an urgent problem on the one hand and the deployment of the best available intellectual scholarly resources to address it on the other, is in no way, of course, limited to moral and political philosophy, my own discipline. Instead, I think this is often very much what scientists across the board aspire to do. I find that this approach of perceiving a problem and then addressing it is an integral element of basically all meaningful scientific inquiry, no matter whether in engineering, computer science, biology, history, economics, and so on. So this is actually the first point. Science can and often does result from a combination of sensibility and reason. Now here's the second point. Ultimately, this thought generates an urgent call for individual scholars, including GYA members, I would say, to make responsible use of their sensibility and then do so in order to meaningfully deploy their reasoning capacities, their innovative and original skills to solve problems. So I think all should see to it that they deploy their precious and highly esteemed skills for relevant problems that actually improve the world by improving the lives of people, sustainably embedded in an environment that also fares well. And many academic disciplines actually can contribute to this task. So this, of course, is a perennial challenge and one that demands a lot from individual researchers. But many people outside of academia trust in science to contribute to addressing such challenges and to propose smart solutions for actual and urgent problems. Yet I feel that way too often science is addressing problems that do not really matter in the way introduced, or even worse, that they advance only the interests of the few, maybe that place profits over well-being of people, etc. And if science does that, it does not only gamble away any existing trust it might enjoy, it also leads to a disentanglement of sensibility for what actually matters from reason and scholarly skills on the other hand. I, in my personal experience, always found GYA folks to be rather on the right side of things, seeking and largely achieving also harmonization and integration of sensibility and reason. So with these brief remarks, I might have been preaching to the already converted. Yet stating the obvious and making things explicit is, at least on occasion, also important, and hopefully at least it won't harm. And with that, I hand over to, I think, Mitsunobu for his commentary.
Thank you very much. Now we move on to Mitsunobu, as Jan-Christoph said.
All right, okay. It's a bit different from given order, but thanks to Jan-Christoph's recommendation, I will next to. So let me first share you the slide that I have prepared for this talk. This is it. First of all, I wish to share you why we use this photograph for this page. This is showing some way of thinking, which is originated from Japan and maybe from China, ancient China, which is to learn only to be contented. The reason why I have loved this way of thinking is that this is somehow different from the way of thinking that is going on in the world now, but more resembling to what we needed to think throughout the SDGs. And maybe looking back at this kind of different way of thinking in various regions in the world, it may be nice to looking back some valued way of thinking, which is not mainstream now. So I think the reason and sensibility balancing would be one of them. The way I thought is that in Japan, we may sometimes prioritize more the sensibility, not much of reasons sometimes. I will give you some examples afterwards. So this is how we split it by these two factors. We will be motivated by the emotions, but sometimes we may stop ourselves by reasons, and maybe vice versa. So here's how social norms treat the balance between them. This is due to some psychological work from Richard Nisbet, saying that in Asian priorities, we sometimes needed to value the uniformity and harmony, and therefore sometimes stop us to do arguments or discussions much, and maybe more prioritize the knowing others' sensibility. But in Western priorities, well, this is generalized way, therefore it may be sometimes different, but in general, Western priorities would valuing the diversity and the individualism, and therefore you may sometimes need to argue more, but to get some agreement, you may need to use the evidences or some facts that you can share. But sometimes you need to determine a winner, and in Asian priorities, it would be possibly decreasing hostility in a group, at least. So these are some differences. So looking back the scientific evidences, which is related to balance between the sensibility and reasons, this is by Daniel Kahneman, who is the Nobel laureate from the behavioral economy, is summarizing the way of thinking that which is rooted from the psychology, that our recognition system is first of all fast thinking way, which is more intuitive and maybe affected by emotions. A system two would be slow and therefore need more energy to use it, but more logical and sometimes more evidence-full. So maybe rooted on this way of summarizing the findings from the human recognitions, the balance between the sensibility and reasons may somehow resembling to this way of understanding the human recognitions. And scientists are trained to using the system two more than system one. The general public may utilize the system one more sometimes, and therefore balancing in between them would be very important. So in my view, scientists are the people who wish to make the generalized finding throughout the different situations that we can observe. And of course, the fact generalized is relating to all more people, but still, if we use that generalized fact to the individuals, there might be some differences, of course. For example, in my field, medicine, if I say your average expectancy of length of your life, of course, that's true to everyone, but that may not be true for yourself. And therefore, how we can lessen that gap is somewhat we need to think about if we explain some generalized fact from science to the individuals. And here you may sometimes need compassion to build more trust. This seems to be theorized by psychological findings, which may be better proved by Rob's story afterwards. So we had this disaster 10 years ago, where scientists were blamed for less skilled explanations about the scientific finding about atomic something for the humans. And now we have this, where we need again to think about the balance between reasons and sensibility. Thank you very much. That's all for me.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to Rob.
Hello. I'm Rob Jenkins. I'm a psychologist at the University of York in the UK and a GYA alumni. I love this theme of harmonizing reason and sensibility because you can take it in so many directions. And as Yoko mentioned, there are connections to this year's theme of trust in science. Let me give you an example of the sort of thing I have in mind. So you're all in the business of knowledge generation in some form or another, where there is a premium on reason and evidence. And you have a very unusual perspective on that way of life because you see it from the inside, right? You know what it is like to live a life of science and scholarship because you live it every day. And you know that every day includes not only your work, but also you know, an emotional life, maybe a family life, and the many personal interests that you have in music or sport or cooking, or travel, whatever it may be. And this is a side of you that we associate with sensibility on a personal level, aesthetics, values, humanity, and so on. But let us turn now to an outside perspective. What do people make of us if they are outside of professional science and scholarship? I think it's fair to say that no one is interested in your emotional life and your personal interests, right? Everyone has those. So people want to see what is different. And so what is presented is what is distinctive, the white lab coat, the exotic equipment, the weird jargon, and so on. And that selectiveness is understandable, but it magnifies differences between scientists and non-scientists, and until those differences fill the entire frame sometimes. And at the same time, it overlooks commonalities between scientists and non-scientists until those commonalities disappear. I'm simplifying, of course, but is it any wonder that scientists are viewed by so many as detached and aloof and remote? Even our students, of all people, right? If they see you with your family or in the cinema, they're shocked, right? That to discover that you're, you know, an actual human being, and that's our students. So what chance does anyone else have? So if our sensibilities are not clear in the minds of others, something will rush in to fill the vacuum. And we shouldn't be too surprised if what fills the vacuum is suspicion, mistrust, conspiracy theories. You know, what are they up to with their inscrutable motives over there? So that's one side of the coin. Scientists don't get full credit for their sensibility. And the other side of the coin is that non-scientists don't get full credit for their rationality. And this too can drive groups apart. But what do I mean when I say that non-scientists don't get full credit for their rationality? Someone I know who is an art teacher by training had to buy a replacement window. Now windows come in all shapes and sizes. The question is, what size should she get? Now, bear in mind, there are many ways to pursue an answer here, and some ways are more reliable than others. She could pray. She could consult a psychic. Right? She could ask a friend for advice. She could try to interpret her dreams and seek inspiration there. In fact, what she did was measure the dimensions of the window frame and compare those measurements to the dimensions of the windows that were available. And if we were to break that down, what we would see is the hypothesis generation, observation, deduction, right? Hallmarks of rationality. And you know what? It worked. People don't recognize when they are using very effectively scientific methods outside of a professional context. And it's a shame because it minimizes common ground precisely where I suggest we ought to maximize. So we underplay sensibility in scientists and we underplay rationality in non-scientists. This is a double mistake that leaves us all worse off, and we should work to put it right. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now we move on to Sandra.
Hello, everybody. I want to follow a little the idea of Rob about using, harmonizing reason and sensibility for trust in science, especially in countries like mine, where people did not really know they had scientists in their country. They don't really understand what scientists do because they have a really biased view of what is a scientist with what they see in their movie. And also where we want to increase the effect of the scientist community to help the country to meet the SDG goals. But how can we communicate? So interestingly, because there's this difference between scientists and the community that Rob just explained, one of the strategies we're doing is the opposite. What I mean is, no matter if we're trying to show to the community that, so there's two things, because I'm a virologist and I'm in public health, and they need a lot of us to communicate our results in a clear way so people can understand them and then can use them from themselves. When I was answering the COVID response, they asked me scientific questions, but most of the time at the end, they will ask me personal questions. So we will go totally opposite to what Rob said, at least for us in Latin America. The personal side of the person was maybe the most important thing. So for them, it was important to know that I am a woman that has a normal life, that has a family, and that has 2 kids. And what was, and how I was balancing my personal life with the scientific life and the COVID response life, because this is another specific way of working, different to your everyday scientist, work. So they could understand that first, scientists, we were humans and we had a normal life. So then we can have an emotional connection with the people. Second, they wanted to show people what was all the time that the science and health people were giving to the COVID response, so that they understand that we're doing it for them. This is something that was really important, that people understand that when I was telling them to wear a mask, it was not to bother them or to go against their individual right, but it was because I was caring for them and because I was giving all the time from my family for them. So this is what's really important, how we communicate here. The sensibility was as important as the reason, and maybe more important. And they're using it for the second thing. So this will be to begin the science communication and the trust between the people. You're giving them scientific information in the most clearer way, as well as advice, but also to use us as role model. Because as a woman in science, in a Latin American country, they use us as models so young people know they can do science, because most of the people here don't even know they can do a career in science. And second, that women, we can do science as well as men, so that young girls are also interested by science field. So at least in our case, we try to use the reason and the sensibility as much as possible to really meet the people. And we need, and this is maybe something important for us as scientists, is to learn how to use this sensibility to try to be in the other person's mind. So if we're explaining something, it's really good to use everyday examples so they can really see how they will help them and why it's important to understand that scientific context or that scientific advice. And something really interesting is we're always talking about open science and about citizen science. And to really do citizen science, we really need to understand the reason and sensibility of scientists and non-scientists that are working together, and also how to interact in a way where we are not the ones always giving information to them, but that the world also taking information from them. So we are in a similar level, even if each of us will have different expertise and values. And this emotional link and this empathy to try to understand the other is really important to build trust of the community, and also to build trust to collaborate between the community and the scientists. And this, the cultural context and the cultural sensitivities are really important, because for some cultures, it's really important to know how you interact so you can build trust. And it's really important to know, how to show respect for what the culture and the people are bringing to you as a scientist. And this is something that we sometimes need to learn, because most of the time as scientists and as experts, we have this idea that we are the expert, we are the best. So when we arrive to a community to try to give advice or to communicate science, we arrive more like, the old version of the teacher, that I know everything and you are learning. And we don't arrive as we are humans like you. I can try to show you my expertise in the best way that could be interesting for you. Please also show me your expertise that maybe will teach me something as scientist or as human. And this is something that I think is really important, to try to harmonize reason and sensibility during scientific discussions, as well as during interactions between scientists and non-scientists. And the empathy and putting yourself in the other's shoe is maybe one of the most important things, to know when you have to stop a discussion, or when you have to stop a scientific subject, or when do you have to stop a non-scientific subject, so you don't make the other one feel too bad. And this is maybe harmonizing the diversity and individualism of the Western with the harmony and uniformity of the Asian, if I can follow what was just said. Because if we try to understand our diversity, but finally understand our similarity of all humans, maybe we will show a little more respect between others when we are doing science, as well as when we're doing everyday life. And then I have to stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I had very similar experiences too. When I was on the TV show, everybody cared about that I was pregnant, not my research topic. But I felt that it's important to like have connection first, then so that they feel like they know me and they can now listen to me. Okay, thank you very much. And now we're supposed to have another speech person to speak, but he had some family emergency. So now we move on to the group discussion breakout rooms. But before that, as some of you have joined late, so I will try to explain what we do in a group session. So this is what we do in the breakout room. Our focus area group members become a moderator, so please don't worry. And maybe one of you can be a scriber, but anyone can join and write on the Google Doc. And in a group, please introduce yourself and share your background, and please each person to contribute. And the discussion topic is what question you'd like to ask in this topic, harmonizing reason with sensibility. For example, what is so appealing about science? What is rewarding about insight and progress? Or anything that you start to think after listening to the speech of board members. So, okay, now we will move on to the breakout room.
Excuse me. After group discussion, what will happen? So maybe we need to report the summary of the discussion. Yes. How many minutes?
Okay, I forgot to explain that part. So we have around 20 minutes breakout rooms, and after that we gather again, and each group will share what you guys discuss in the group. Then we will close the session. Thank you very much, Akihiro, for following up. So now we can move on to the group session. See you all later. Okay, now we are back to the general room, and now we want to start sharing what you guys discussed in each room. So maybe we can start with group 1. Group 1 is the group of Mitsunobu.
So Aisha will share us what we were wondering about.
Yes, thanks. I think we were wondering what we're wondering about for a little bit of the time, but we were I think we had some discussions about especially this topic of if you're in a position of something like science advice to government or something, how do you communicate and engage with governments in dealing with a disaster? But what we got deeper about is to say, are we speaking about even if you bring in empathy and trust and all of these things, is what we're talking about science communication and framing, or are we talking about adopting moral relativism? Because you might be having discussions around topics where you have completely different assumptions to begin with about how you're engaging with content, and what do you do when you get to that level of discussion where you actually have to consider
yes, I'm not sure how to frame it, but this was right towards the end, but we had a discussion around these topics. So I guess the difference between framing and communication versus if you're really coming from completely different moral frameworks, how do you have that discussion? Maybe that's a question. Does that do it justice?
Thanks. Yes.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much. Maybe group 2, the group of young Christoph.
Thanks, Yoko. Yeah, I'm going to report back. We had a couple of members of the program organizing committee, so we were kind of thinking of how would we structure the topics. We latched onto a word wonder, which we found resonance with, and thought about how to structure some conversations around having a diagnostic element, so kind of assessing what the situation is in terms of these different categories and the tensions that are there, but then also having quite a forward-looking perspective about the future and some preparedness for these things. And 2 questions that we thought we could put on the table would be what counts as harmony and what is progress in terms of going forward. I think if there's anything I've missed, please jump in.
Okay, thank you very much. Now group 3, the group of Ralph.
Rob, you're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry, okay. I think there were 2 main areas that came up in our conversation. One had to do with these matters in relation to COVID and response to COVID, things like vaccine hesitancy. So one person was asking, well, what do you do if people say they would prefer to pray for protection rather than take a vaccine, for example? And obviously this is complicated, but part of it is misinformation. Part of it is how things like social media combine with word of mouth to amplify messages that can be unhelpful. But there's also another aspect to this, which has nothing to do with misinformation and with religion, but has to do with the history of colonialism and how interventions have worked out in the past for certain groups. So I think that's an interesting angle. The other thing that we talked about was AI, briefly. What do we make of AI systems? Are they logical or reasonable? How good or bad is online life? And I think this too is a very interesting area where this dynamic between sensibility and reason can play out in the not too distant future. So I'm glad that that was raised as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to group 4, the group of Sandra.
So Encie or Martin, are you going to make a resume of what we talk?
Go ahead, Sandra, go ahead.
Me? Okay, I already talk a lot. Okay, so there was a really interesting discussion that the breaking room like stopped totally in the middle of the phrase between Martin and Encie. Okay, so we touched different topics. The first, it was how, scientists finally, we use a lot our logic or reason for our own work as scientists, but how we don't always, for example, for climate change, we know this is a problem, then we know this is a challenge, we know there's has to take measures, but do we really use all our knowledge to our everyday life? To all of us really change what we do every day so we can have an impact, positive impact in the climate change or in the plastic situation, etc. So this was something where we're thinking that sometimes we think we're logical, but we don't always use our logic mixed with sensitivities for some decisions in our life. And then there was a really interesting discussion about Martin, how science puts on aside and underestimate intuition, but in reality, how we use intuition a lot in our scientists' discovery and in our scientists' analysis of data. So this was something interesting where we again think we're really logic, but we forgot that as humans, in reality, we're a mix of logic, sensitivity, and intuition. And then NCA make us think again to the question Yoko had at the beginning of the session. It was, why is science interesting? So how we can make science interesting for people using harmonization in between reason and sensitivity. And this was the really interesting discussion that was, just stop. Because one of the strategies that NCA say is, because sometimes we talk too general, we talk about, the happiness of the curiosity when we have something new and a knowledge, but the knowledge is so abstract and so vague for the community that we don't always make them as happy and eager about it like us. And how we should show them the application of the science behind this discovery, so then to interest them more. And then Martin in reality disagrees, because he thinks that in reality people are really attracted to these abstract things of science, like black holes, that they don't understand, but they're really attracted by them. And in this case, he thinks that finally they may be more curious than us. For me, I think it's really, again, a balance between both and a harmonizing between both, because I think that people are maybe curious, and with some specific things of science, we can attract them with really scientific data of observation. But most of the time, if we really want to touch them, we will need to show, like NCSA, what's their application for life, so they can really understand why science is important, or how science is in their everyday life, even if we're doing something that that they don't think is really scientist. So yeah, so I think we stop there.
Thank you very much. And next is our group. Anyone, we decided to present. Maybe Akihiro, can you share what we have discussed?
Me? Okay. So, yes, in our group, we have discussion about the definition of the, firstly, definition of the harmonizing this reason and sensibility. So the Yoko says the connection of scientists with general citizen is one of possible definition. So in that sense, the science, the communication with general citizen is really important. But actually, the language of scientists is really specialized, so it's not understandable to the people. It's not, the limited people can understand that language. So to enhance interaction with general citizens, we need to clearly explain some benefit to society. That is one way for effective communication with general citizens. And in another sense, aspect, we have discussed about scientists is really egoistic people, because we scientists is every day exposed to some too much competition. So every day we need to think of that we should be the first place in any situations. So we tend to be really egoistic. so we need to much deeply think about this situation, but for connection with the general people. Finally, we discussed how to fill the gap between citizen and scientist, and how to make this gap closer. So in that sense, but we need to show the diverse role models of the scientist. Actually, just in the traditional evaluation system, maybe the scientist is measured by just scientific achievement, but we are actually a part of citizen. So in that sense, we need to take a diverse role in the society. So we need to show them diverse role models of the scientists. So that is one possible way to the gap between the citizen and scientist. Then finally, Nina raised one question: that is it possible to overcome unconscious bias for harmonizing reason and sensibility? So, but due to the time limitation, our discussion had stopped in the middle of the discussion. So, okay, so that is summary of discussion about our group. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Because of the number of presenter was a bit smaller than planned, so the time we have sorry, we have more time to discuss. So I think now I want to open this to the everyone to raise hands and say if you want to add more slides or more. Sorry. Is there anyone who wants to say something or raise questions to anyone?
Yoko, kindly show your baby. I think she or he is willing to tell something to us. Oh, what a beautiful baby.
She's really so cute.
Yeah. I think she has a question, Yoko, or statement, something like that about the GYA.
Sorry, my baby in Thailand.
No, that's so cute. She will be 1 year for the next AGM in Japan, so that's good. She will be participating. Yeah. So there's something, I don't know if, things we could do this year for next year is from the discussion where NC say about, what we say or think is important and if it's translated to other everyday actions or not. So do we really harmonize reason and sensitivity every day as scientists? And in a way, are we really sometimes models to what we should be done to the non-scientists? And sometimes we're really not. So I know there's a lot of survey in the GYA, so maybe one more is too much, I don't know. But we were wondering, could we, ask between GYA members and alumnus, all these different big challenge is for them is important, what they think of them, if they work on them as scientists. But then we can ask everyday decisions in life to try to see, are we really using all this knowledge in our everyday life? If we are really scared of climate change, what do we do every day to maybe have, to maybe have an impact that would be more positive to stop climate change or to make people aware or to produce less CO2, so this is something I don't know if you think is interesting or not. And I also say it's kind of complicated because your impact will depend so much in where you live, because you don't always have all the tools every part to try to take the best decision. So most of the time you will take the best decision available. But yeah, so I don't know if the group thinks it's interesting or not.
Yeah, I completely agree with the idea of the Sandra to have a survey. And maybe at then we can have a booklet, how we can have the application of the scientific results in our life. For example, when I was in Japan 2 years ago, I was in the dormitory of the university, and there was a booklet explaining that how you can save the environment. And I really learned a lot from that booklet, saying that, for example, the simple one was that if you want to make a cup of tea, why you make 1 liter of water to boil it, and then the rest is not really used because you are also wasting the water and also the electricity to boil that. So that's something that I keep in my mind always, that, okay, if you want to have 1 cup of coffee, you don't really need to boil 1 liter of that. So if there are something really simple stuff that I really never realized that they can have effect on this on the environment. For example, I was sorry for saying that, but I was in the toilet of the university, and there was a sign saying that if you close the cup of the toilet, it will be good for the environment, because we are not going to have the effect of the CO2 by spreading in the air. So it was really great idea that we should put this kind of the science for the people, that should affect their life. If you just do really simple things, you really want to make a really big steps in your life to save the environment. So by really small things, you can change your life. So maybe you're encouraging your family just to separate the garbage in a plastic ones, and also, I don't know, paper, and also the other things will be really helpful things, and that we don't really do in our life, because we are saying, okay, who really care these things? But one person can change it. Maybe we can ask the people what they do for the human being and for the future, for the next generations in their life, how they save the environment, save the energy, and all these things. And maybe we can have a really short booklet in a really infographic way to share with the people, saying, look, they're really simple things. Just hang on the walls and try to follow these rules. It's really helpful for your life. That would be, I think it's okay to do it.
Thank you. That is very interesting and important idea. We think we do it to save the electricity or resources, but we didn't really think it's related to SDGs. But it did. When I saw some people who were asked if they know SDGs, they in the general public, they often say, what is SDGs in nowadays also, but they do this kind of a small thing in everyday life. So it's important to connect what you do in everyday life, and in fact, it's related to science and scientific issues we are tackling. Thank you. Anyone who wants to say anything else? Okay, Ralph?
Yeah, just a quick one. We've been talking about some topic areas that could fit under this theme. I also think it might be interesting to consider cross-cutting questions about values that motivate scientific inquiry. Martin mentioned curiosity, I think, as one. But also we could think about feelings of care for future generations and wanting the lives of future people to go well, these sorts of ideas, which are not necessarily tied to a particular topic or crisis, but given the opportunity to think about sensibility, I think it would be an interesting area of inquiry to think about values. That's it.
Can I ask a question? Also, I'm wondering about this sensitivity to put yourself in others' shoes to understand some scientific problem, but also some SDG problems. do you think it sometimes is more complicated in some cultural settings where the individualism is a lot more important than the group? Because sometimes this is something that I think maybe this, good for all will maybe some people would resonate, but some others no. You need to touch them in another way, and because their sensitivity is different, and even the idea of sharing what you have or why in these moments, even for COVID response, what the best will be to be all together and to think as a planet, because the virus has no frontiers. We have shown scientists as well as politics that we were all egoist. So how can we have an harmony between that to have and understand that as a species or something, the best will be to think of the group if we want to think long term in a way where most of the people think short term and what's the benefit for myself and my group and not the other groups. So how I can close frontiers because I have the water and the other doesn't. So in a way, instead of helping, to attain this sustainable and equitable kind of development some people would like, we're maybe putting some issues and challenge worse. So I don't know how to explain what I want to say.
Yeah, I kind of understand. Related to COVID response, in Japan, nobody has problem with wearing masks. Maybe a few, but not many people. But in other countries, I heard a lot of people are against wearing a mask because we know that wearing masks not only saving our lives, but also saving other people's lives. And to promote vaccine also, for young people, some people say it's not a big deal to be infected by COVID. So some people say we don't want to have vaccine. But if we say vaccine can save not only your life, but also others' lives, it's a public health matter, then they decided to take vaccine. So in Japan, it's very common to say that they think about other people, to save others' lives. Then they can make change rather than thinking of themselves only. Okay. Maybe Mr. can you say something?
Shimpuku-san, so how about collecting ideas or wishes for the next AGM that may be related to harmonization between?
Sorry, repeat again. My baby was screaming.
So how about collecting ideas or wishes for the next AGM?
Idea research?
Ideas and wishes
Ah,
in a more general context.
okay.
What will we discuss in the next AGM? Or
So anyone who are you having response to the question?
My idea maybe is that maybe for the next generation, maybe we can make some questions or maybe some matches or some surveys for the people, at least in Japan, to just get involved about their ideas, how they can see the connection of the science and citizens in their lives. Or we can start from the school kids, so they can draw their ideas about the science and about the scientists, about their life. So maybe that also gives us a sense how the public think about scientists and then about their life and about their way. That would be helpful somehow.
Thank you. Any other ideas? Maybe John, do you want to say something?
So I probably was going to go back to the earlier point about trying to gauge what different people in different contexts think that the role of science and scientists would be in thinking about some of the future challenges, especially if you can think about this type of thing among young people, what they see the role of science in the way in which we address future country but also global challenges. I think it's an important thing, and especially when you think about current COVID and how science has played a role, it might then be useful to have that. I think a couple of speakers have already talked about maybe we are over surveying populations and things like that, but it does appear to be like if we want to begin to think about science, reason, and all of that, it might be a good idea to start to think about what do people think. Of course, we are talking about distrust and all of that, but there are also many places where events like COVID is probably strengthening people's beliefs and hopes in science, in the way in which the response was organized and delivered and all of that. And so it might also be good to think about what people see as the central role. We could choose some of the big issues that are on the global stage, pandemics, climate change, those kind of things, and gauge what the vision for science in addressing those challenges would be in different contexts. And so that could allow for some comparison, but also like probably throw up very specific questions that can, for example, be pursued using some of the interdisciplinary kind of like groups, research groups that we're thinking about.
Thank you very much. It has been a great discussion, and I think we are running out of time. So we want to continue the discussion until next AGM. So please join our Harmonizing Reason with Sensibility Focus Area Group, or you can also become a POC. Then we can all plan next AGM and what we want to discuss for the next year. So because of the time limitation, I'd like to close the session. Thank you very much for bearing with my situation, and please continue to discuss until next year. Thank you very much.